Mi nombre es Teresa Moldealba. Yo soy la directora para América
In our Global Pact of the United Nations. I'd like to thank you for being here today in this special series of the Academy. This is the response, we're going to talk about the response to COVID-19. This is the 7th week in which we present leaders from the United Nations, the private sector, and the government that to give us their perspective to the response in the complex process of economic social recovery that we are facing. I'd like to introduce our 300 participations to the 300 participations of our panelists from today. We have Alicia Barcena, the Executive Secretary of the ECLAC. We also have Luis Felipe Lopez Calva, the co-director of the Subsecretary of the United Nations and the co-director of the Development Report from Peru, Raul Alemán, the General Banco General, the most important bank of Panama, which signed the Global Pact since 2001, and Thomas Keller, the Colbún General Manager, one of the most important power companies in Chile and a member of Global Pact since 2018. In moments of crisis, the principles of Global Pact of the United Nations are more important than ever to ensure that the private sector response is seen through the lens of human rights, decent work, environmental protection, and anti-corruption. In Latin America, we count with 14 local global compact networks which have been working with 2,000 companies that are part of our initiatives, articulating both conversations within the private sector and concrete initiatives to support governments at the local and country level, as well as with a collaboration with the United Nations system. The first response from the private sector was to guarantee health and safety of its workers. The second is the support in logistics, material supply, and sanitary equipment. The third action of the private sector was related to solidarity and support for both their clients, their communities, and vulnerable populations in our countries. From all that, we're going to hear examples from Banco General and Colbún. And I'd like to highlight the commitment of the private sector to the 10 principles of the Global Pact. It's been crucial to the response. Furthermore, the sustainability focus and the 2030 agenda are going to be even more crucial in this recovery process they're going to face. Today, we're going to be able to hear from the hand of the highest representatives of the Economic Commission for Latin America and Caribbean and United Nations what are the main impacts of the regional economic, social, and environmental challenges and how we're going to face them in the recovery process. With this introduction, I hope it was a good overview to start a conversation that I'd like to throw a question to the group, to the 4 panelists. I'd like to open our discussions to give from the perspective of your organizations, if you can reflect on the crisis and the impact that you have today in your country and in your region. Alicia, I'd like to pass you the floor first from the ECLC. Thank you, Teresa, and everybody. Thank you for inviting me to this great event. I think it's very important because actually we are facing a situation never seen before, a global quarantine. And we never thought that the spread of this exception state, sanitary exception states, would be so broad in humanity. Like we've seen this in different times of the world, but never altogether like this. It's not a banking crisis, now we have a health crisis. And the first time it happens in this country. And this way we need to understand the state, of course, to have a role. And of course, the companies are playing a very crucial role because the impact of the pandemic and to protect a couple of things mainly health and economy. And this balance that we need to learn to coexist with this pandemic, at least for the next 6 months, 1 year, until we find a vaccine, we will need to learn how to work differently. From this perspective of the ECLAC, we have a COVID-19 observatory, and we are presenting all measures in different fronts, social, economic, and health realms, and of course the tax issue as well. And we also have a tab for gender. I'd like to invite all of you who are participating to send information so we can tell us what the companies are doing, what efforts they're doing. It will be the highest economic contradiction we've lived since 1940, 1918, 1914, 18. And of course, with the drop in the prices of commodities and economic activities, exports in the region, prices are going down at least by 25%. So we're talking about something very serious. We are breaking global value chains, and that affects the very important interests like the auto companies in Mexico and Brazil, for example. They don't have uh, special materials, and also the pandemic will force us to create a new economic geography. And what happened in the previous year, everything that we've seen will change. And in the region, we also have an impact with the drop of migrations, especially in the case of Mexico. It raised a little bit in the past few months, but we are expecting a drop. Tourism is going to be one of the most affected sectors. And I have to tell you, and of course, to finish this intervention, to tell you that unemployment in the region, we forecast is going to grow by 3 to 4% at least. That means like 12 million more unemployed people. And that's going to have a huge impact in poverty, to increase by 30 million people in poverty and 16 million people in extreme poverty. So the region that had reached level socioeconomic stage is having a setback, and we need to take emergence levels to try to hold this rich recess that we are showing. I'm going to present an assessment of the economic impact in the region. And my final point is that the countries and states are trying to take very powerful measures. For example, here in Chile, 5% of the GDP in Peru, 12% to support companies with a low-cost credit, but we don't know the duration of this crisis. This safety line can, for 6 months, it can become like the safety line because we don't know how to support. We have to get the society to generate a different pact for the future because the states are getting to the limit of their fiscal budget and they're going to go for credit lines, and the IMF through the IMF all credits in other ways for Central America asking to postpone interest payments for 2020. And I hope, Teresa, that I could give you a very quick overview of what's going on. Excellent. Thank you. This search for a balance between economic and social will be very complex. Luis Felipe, thank you. First of all, it's a pleasure to be part of this event with my colleagues and my family. I like to thank you for the opportunity. As Alisa has mentioned before, Latin America has been struggling for the past few years to try to not only be average income, but to have a society of medium class. And now Latin America reached this crisis with uh, a, a high level of inequality and with a high level of vulnerable population. Not only that, but we had a drop of confidence in government. That's how we get to this crisis. And the crisis affects all these structural crises and interact with these structural elements to lead us to such a complex situation as Alicia just said. I just want to say, which is important, that it's important to pay attention when you start talking about these crises. For example, when you talk about extreme climate events, we are used to have a problem with physical capital. And with financial capital and human capital, we can have responses to rebuild the physical capital. Now we are hitting the labor, the human capital, but we have a health shock as well. We have 180 countries in the world with a lockdown or some sort of lockdown. So we have to be careful on how together we can think in a transition to the new normality that we're going to have to build a more productive economy and more resilient economy. But we also need to build confidence in our governments, and we want to need the private sector as an actor in this recovery. I think it's very important, and the general sector secretary have given us from the technical aspect. We've been working uh, on it, and we had the opportunity to talk a little bit more. But I think this is the characteristics of the challenge that we have yet to come. Thank you, Alicia and Luis Felipe, for your regional view. Now I'd like to pass to the corporate world. Raúl Alemán, if you can tell us a little bit from your context in your country and the financial sector, how you see this situation. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, everybody. Good morning. I'd like to tell that from a government point of view, Panama has been acting very diligently. The government has been very fast in decision making and in the perspective of what is important, which is health. We have a national emergency in the past few months, and the Ministry of Health, based on the information from doctors and the specialists in health, the government has started to take in actions that had to do with the pandemic. And of course, the population wants to get out of the quarantine and the lockdown, but with the numbers that we can see, until we have a change in the curve and the capacity of our ventilators and beds, once we can meet these objectives, and then the government is starting to be in a position to have raise some of the restrictions very accordingly in different waves, regardless of the time that we're going to need to do so. So now we at least have some kind of clarity of what we have and the path that we need to take. On the other hand, we need to say that Panama is different from other countries in the region. We don't have a central bank. We use dollar as our currency. So the financial sector in Panama has gone through previous experiences to keep banks in Panama high level of liquidity and capital. We don't have, so we do have a less resource there, and we've negotiated an important credits that would go around $400,000 million that are being used to attack the health issues and later on the whatever has to do with the support that we can leave through the financial sector. As my final reflection in this introduction, I'd like to tell you that this is a subject that's been attracting uh, people, different people from all over the world, from governments to companies. And the only thing that we can hear is we need to be solidary. And solidarity is very important. So being solidary is not easy. That implicates in having uh, to benefit those who really need. And those who really need are a lot of people, because this is an event with a huge social impact. And the companies send solidarity to everybody. We feel that the companies, even if they don't have income, it's very easy to say, okay, let's get everybody and help everybody. But then what can I do later? So we want the clients who can pay the system, the banking system, to pay. We don't want a moratorium. We don't want a. So solidarity means a lot of things, and they need to submerge in our society so we can face this crisis in a more positive way. And from this perspective, we think that companies, banks, all businessmen and women in the region must understand the solidarity is is something that will help us in the future as well. I think, Raul, we introduced a very important concept. I want to see the perspective of what Thomas can tell us about Chile from his context. Thank you for this forum. I'd like to share this instance with all of you who are here today. I'd like to say, to present three basic ideas. Of course, we live in an exception moment in the modern history, and we are looking at, we need some exceptional focus, and the impact will be that we need to learn how to live with levels of uncertainties and volatility for a long time. And that leads me to my second reflection, the need to be humble and flexible in this process. Nobody has all the answers. Nobody knows how it's going to end. So all of us, workers, companies, banks, government, they have to take a path of learning and adjustment. And that's going to be like that for a while. And my third reflection that really touches me has to do with the response and the role of the business world. I think there are companies and sectors that have been damaged in this process a lot. And some of them, we cannot live with this level of activity. Some of them just can't. In the case of Chile, for example, what I know, which is more close to me, I've seen a very hard response in the system from some of the companies. For example, from all companies connected to basic services like water, gas, power, etc., that have been available without doing costs in their budget, because those are very important services. And also in the case of Chile, we have the banking sector. They are flexibilized their credit and also flexibilize their commercial conditions. The first phase of the response has to do with workers, because when they could work, and when we had special measures, as when you do in cyclical industries, but then there are companies that in this crisis are getting close to work together with their interests, their groups of interest. Some of them flexibilizing the conditions and terms with their clients and also with their suppliers. And also some of them put their capacity available to help their communities and more vulnerable groups. These capacities sometimes implicate in some money, some financial resources, like what happened with Chile emergency fund for health in the Confederation of Commerce. And they raised some money for this type of action. But not only money is important, but also the infrastructure for personnel, the coordination that the private sector and how they made it available to this crisis. That is the case of Colbún. I've also seen in many other companies that are articulating different types of response. Companies such as they're producing masks or ventilators, they're putting their efforts in, for workers. Companies there are changing the way they pay their clients, for example. And that's a second dimension showing that large, medium, and small companies have a unique position in this current world are making more evident than ever. Thank you, Thomas. Uh, I have many words that you mentioned, like uncertainties, human capital, solidarity. We need to be humble. We need to be flexible. And maybe the last sentence, the public role and the business role of what we're talking about, the connection that you want to generate. I'd like now to ask some specific questions to Alicia. ECLAC has already published 2 reports for the socioeconomic impact of COVID in the region, and as you said, you're launching the COVID-19 Observatory. And from the whole presentation and introduction that you've done, can you share with us what other aspects you have that have a specific impact in the private sector? Of course, Teresa. First of all, as Luis Felipe said, this crisis take us to a lot of structural problems with fragmented sectors in health and safety. And this is a social effect, social event where the vulnerability is in human capital and health, income and abilities. And with that, we need to make our specific approach. One of the problems that we are facing in the region is that 75% of the workers and the economic active population, they are not affiliated or in any health system. To say the poorer people, like 48% on average, 58 are out of a pension system and 53% are informal workers. They don't have any sort of social protection. So I believe that what we need to target now and what companies are doing and what's been very interesting is that especially in the service sector, they have stopped completely. There are some other sectors that are making money, like digital companies are the winners. We are almost all of us, those who can have this digital activity, are in working in from home or home office. But of course, there's no question that we still have very serious problems, and companies, let's say, need to think together and what's the best thing to do to try to strengthen our labor force. So then we have companies, as Thomas said, in Chile, for example, we have there are companies who provide medical equipment. They only produce 4% of medical equipment. 4. Everything is important. Everything else is important. So the private sector is helping a lot by bringing ventilators, or in other countries, like changing their manufacture, like those who produced alcoholic beverage are now producing alcohol gel. There's an adaptation in the industrial sector, and that's very interesting and make us think how can we progress. Of course, this crisis is qualified with a lot of uncertainties and will lead us in a way that we're going to have to think about income. We are proposing a basic income, emergency income. We call it EDIT, basic income, emergency income. Will be like a income for a poverty level that will cover the most the poorest level, and I'm talking about 215 million people. Why do we need to protect income? Because it's going to cost money. It will cost a lot of work to the companies to overcome this, and we need to strengthen that productive capacity. But now it's going to be very hard to have supply and demand. Altogether, we need to come to an agreement on how can we manage to have this productive conversion. And I think it's an idea, but I think that we need to start thinking and looking at the regional integration. I think we have a lot of strengths, and like Europe needs to look to the inside, and the same thing we need to do here, intra-regional cooperation. And I think that the companies that we need to support are small and medium companies. Of course, large companies are of our concern as well because of the work. Because sometimes they share um, utilities, but we need to wait and to see the criteria to what are the strategic companies that are going to help us to reopen the economy, looking at a different point of view to generate more work and employment. And we are studying it, and we're going to present it in our next report. What are the sectors in Latin America that can help us to reactivate and open the economy? Of course, basic services, and also to collaborate with private sector. That's going to be fundamental. It's very important, as you said, this compass of the productive conversion. It's a transgression because this topic of basic income, who's going to pay it and for how long, that's very controversial. And at the end of the day, everything we look at the private sector. Okay, let me tell you something very quickly. This region has a tax evasion of 6% of the GDP, and this basic income will cost 2.1% for 6 months of the GDP. So imagine how much we are losing with tax evasion. Just to let you know, not financing basic income will be a great mistake because this situation of the population is very serious right now. Very good. Thank you. I think is the reality is that the money is there. It's not that it doesn't exist. Luis Felipe, this pandemic is causing a change of focus in the work of the United Nations system in countries of the region. And I think that is something not very well known, and I would love to share this here. This pandemic is gonna mean change in marks of cooperation and the response to the COVID. Would like you to tell us what does that mean in a practical level? What does that mean for the region? And how are you going to open the space for collaboration with the private sector? The most practical level, as you can tell us. Thank you. I think there are two very concrete things regarding the system. I think this uh, crisis is very important. Once you have the reform, we can take this proposal. We have a system that can work very well. It's an opportunity. There are three basic uh, points that the General Secretary has mentioned. One is the humanitarian part and the health part, according to the Latin American Health Organization, and also the economic part, all under the coordination of the resident coordinators in the regional levels. We are always are following the ECLASC in the regional platform, not only talking about the structure, it's a coherent system to try to get the response of the members and to society as well. What kind of questions? First, financing, loans. It's There's a huge need of loans and credit. We need funds and contingents from the IMF, but we don't have programs for the IMF right now. They are on standby because we still have a lot of questions. They are having their internal questions because of the temporality of these measures and how we are going to put it in place and when, like within 2 years, whether if these measures are going to be able to be financeable or if you be able to finance them. That's the question. And to have a social responsible response and also financial responsible response to the private level. We need to work with central banks. I think Raul will agree with me that we start to see the balance sheet of companies and banks. They needed the finance from the central bank. So the effect of the demand interaction are very important, but they are somehow more limited. So the monetary policy has a very important role. In all that, as a system, we are trying to participate in this dialogue, which is very important. We have some basic principles the private sector has to follow. For example, climate action. How can we make the power sector as a driver for recovery? And also the public investment. This crisis and the importance of the system of loans for households and how important they are. And we are taking see it push back, for example, education using TV or rating very poor regions. I think there is how the private sector can take an important role. As we said before, in this space, this path, the action of radio and television are going to be very important. That means the private sector through loans and finance in concrete actions can add value, but also always with a macroeconomic view. Excellent. I think that Thomas, if you could talk a little bit, you are a leader of a major company in Chile, and you have a very specific word with supply chain. What kind of specific actions you've taken at Colbún? And I'd like to talk about this dimension that Luis Felipe was saying about the energy sector and climate change. What opportunities do you see there? Very good, thank you. Colbún has a long history of relationship in communities where we operate our power centers. Our teams have been interacting with our neighborhoods and using this network. The first thing that we need was to talk with these local communities and local governments to see what were their needs and how we could collaborate as a company. As we started implementing through this first diagnostics, we see that each location had a different need. Sometimes we raised some resources. We helped with masks and other protection, sometimes with money. In other cases, we took the advantage that we have our presence in the region, the territory, so we could build use our networks to with masks and get all this territory this network that we have. So the most important thing than money support that I've said before is to be able to collect and empathize with the the communities. I think that's the most important message as a company that we can pass to try to take this effort and understanding and empathize with local communities. In time of a crisis like the one we are living now, we need the private sector to be very dynamic and to cooperate with the public sector. And finally, I'd like to say that the cost of this crisis should be approached by all who can take an approach on that, like the government, the companies, and also the people that are responsible. Of course, we're doing a lot in all these realms, but we have some failures in some actions as well. We have we need to face this crisis that we are suffering right now, and we also have an opportunity to build more connected societies and more solidary societies as well. About the opportunity that we present for the electric and the power sector in the climate crisis, we've kind of forgotten it in this contingency. Of course, the role of the power sector is very important in the society to be more intensive use and consume of electricity will be more resilient to climate change. In Chile, for example, we've boarded a very aggressive uh, work in changing, replacing thermal power generation to clean energy like water, solar, and wind energy. We had a very aggressive program that is has a forecast for to completely replace our power matrix to 2050 to clean energy. Of course, we cannot forget that. We can never forget that. And us as an industry, we are working very powerfully in that. We cannot forget that. We cannot forget that we have a pending issue in this social action. Thank you, Thomas, Raul. In the time of crisis, making the right decisions is very important. How is the how Banco General is doing to face this crisis, to mitigate this crisis? I can tell you, Teresa, and I can tell our audience that companies that believe in sustainability has a great competitive advantage in the world. And they have it because in their DNA, the way they act, they think about fundamental questions. We think in a long-term condition, not on a short-term view or a narrow view. Of course, you have to act not only in this year's financial results, but the impact that you're going to have to the society in the long term. On the other hand, it's very clear to us our role in all related parties. We've collaborated with communities and governments and so on. From this point of view, we had some contingency plans, and we were talking about all that, and that allowed us to take care of the health of our associates. We have more than 500 and 1,400 associates, and we have like 1,200 are working from home, 1,100 are on vacation right now, and 1,600, I'm sorry. So we are trying to help with the health of our associates and do it quickly, and we were kind of prepared, not as prepared as we should, but we could unfold and into actions to our associates and their families. We made our decision that I think had a great impact because we assured all of our workers to have our work position to this throughout this year, and that created, uh, let me say, a satisfaction to guarantee that the most vulnerables that their household income, people are becoming unemployed, and they know how important it is for them. So that's one message of solidarity for us, that we're guaranteeing their employment. On the other hand, companies that are sustainable, they can make very quick alliances and partnerships uh, as a bank, as a regulator, and together with government regulators. And sometimes didn't have the support, the tools to support their clients with credits. We are having to work with moratoria, and besides, we have in our organization partnerships for health and food, and we created new alliances for Panama Chamber of Social Development and for food. And we've been very active in delivering food for thousands of people with our resources, and volunteers that are working for resources of other companies as well to provide food. And again, not even that, but in health, we've been working directly with the health institute that make all decisions, all the tests that need to be done, and the type of tests that need to be done, and also been working with third parties. We've done partnerships to try to support with all the health supplies. So solidarity is the way to work, and it goes together with what's happening to us right now, to make quick partnerships and understand what we need to do and the sacrifices that we need to do. And that allow us to have an interrelationship between the private sector and the government about this topic, and be able to come up with solutions as fast as we can in a topic that is very, very complex. Thank you, Raul. Now I'd like to Elisa to talk a little bit more about how this crisis is hitting women disproportionately. Part of this impact, the COVID impact, can be seen and we can have a more probability of women to work in informal jobs and underpaid jobs. How can the private sector can support women to reduce this disproportionate situation, and also their work condition and labor? Yes, this is a work that we are doing together with UN Women, and we've had meetings with minister women in the region. We had a very important meeting with the with the Colombia government, because effectively the concentration, well, we have many problems. Increase of violence within the family, that's a very concrete topic, and I think companies can help us with emergency lights to like to detect and prevent and to attend this type of situation in their household. And secondly, the concentration of women work in 4 sectors. They are women affect our 78% regarding social services, uh, commercial services, um, transportation, and warehouses. We have 78 of women working. and how can we deal with unemployment? And we have an overload of work. They also have to work with their kids in the digital education, and at home sometimes with don't have help, and they cannot finance their life. Like tourism has been highly affected. Like 70% of women in tourism are women. So these companies are very important, and we need to call them to support these women, and also domestic workers who don't have social security, and there's a very limited coverage. So what can we do? I think companies can do help to identify what their women in their workforce, give them support and generate what Aru just said, the notion that we are to guarantee their work at least for 2020. This is a very important measure that can help women to have more security and safety, change their wage because they are really working at home. And the final topic is migrant women. Migrant women that are doing their work, the informal economy, we should uh, m- try to manage it more formally, more as a business, because we will need a care economy. More than 70% of the health services are women. Here in Chile, the deaths are mainly women in the health sector. How can we do to actually, given the gender inequality that we have, how can we manage to change, and how can companies can make a difference there? Thank you, Alicia. Gender inequality is very important, and violence in the family is also very important, especially in the Global Compact Network together with women and this topic of gender and incorporated women and violence, all the aspects, and to compare and generate this equality. Luis Felipe, the Secretary General of the United Nations, has asked the governments, business, and civil society to work together to tackle this crisis. How can companies support the efforts of the United Nations? Thank you. Yes, maybe I will talk about how the United Nations can support and in doing some sort of coalition to help the society led by the governments and the private sector, which has a very central role as well. And that's the response to the socioeconomic um, to the crisis, where the private sector is central, but also in a government sitting in the driver's seat. It's important for to have the private sector there. As Lisa mentioned before, we are in a context of high uncertainty. The first incentive is to control the health crisis. We have a huge uncertainty regarding the size of the problem, with a reduced capacity regarding tests. Doing low, few tests don't give us the magnitude of this crisis. How can we keep work together to change this uncertainty, to switch it and manage some sort of to insert certain communities, the probability to give some focus in certain communities and try to manage it more effectively. And here, the private sector has a very crucial role in terms of interconnection of communication. Like in Latin America, we have this the digital or tele education, and to insist that the state in Latin America. Many of the services, social services, and the response is very local, and it has to do with the work that we are doing in Peru. It's a social protection from people to people. That means the close structure in the communities. The state has some level of reach, but companies are communities that connect their workers, that connect those who provide raw materials, those who provide to finance consumers. So the company becomes a structure of proximity, of closeness, including to transmit information and to give the sound support to the public, to support some core communities. So all companies, when they work socially, especially those who are talking right now, in this structure of proximity, which are one more arms to build a solution. For us, as the United Nations is very central, to have this macro financing and others, and also this proximity structures when where we can build this new normal society. Thank you, Luis Felipe. Raul, many companies are taking a step further in helping their workers and their communities. As we said before, that the the Panama sector, they're working on a moratorium for 12 months for those who's been affected. And this is one more concrete effect on how Banco General is doing to protect clients and the community. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Yes, of course. Originally, from the hands of our regulators, we had several tools to the banking system through an agreement, which is to change credits within a 4-month timeline and change this credit for the people. At this time, the the banking group, we are instead of looking in a case by case, especially in the consumption area, to have a general moratorium for everybody, those who are not in banking, they say, okay, you're going to pay what you can. We've done that in the first 3 months, and I can tell you that is a topic of uncertainty, so that companies can start working, and we we use the government, which is make it easier than the bank to allow this payment for for our clients, and allow it until December, especially in case of more affected people. They can start working with one of these institutions and in their personal situations and how they can take their payments. The strategy is we've seen the impact. We have the suspension of payment in credit cards, for example, and postponement of payments of more than 35 clients, for example, more than 65,000 clients, home clients. And this postponement in payments come together with the clients that can pay, they've been paying. They've been paying those who cannot pay because they don't have money, they don't have wages. We are contacting them, and you're going to try to equationate and to equation this and see how they can do. And I think that's very important to be able to reactivate the economy. And the banking role is going to be crucial. Going to be crucial because we're the the driver to make the resources get to the client. You need the support of the government and the regulation agency in terms of having programs that go directly to micro and small companies. They need to start bringing jobs back. Raul, I'd like to ask you, sorry to interrupt because we are coming to the end of it. I'd like to introduce one of the questions, one of the most important questions that we've been getting from our audience. And the question is just to highlight the business part. I say we are giving the moratorium to the consumer, but to the companies, what kind of support we are giving companies, and how can you see in the future in this curve that in Panama that it looks like that the curve is starting to get back into the system. Depending on the situation of the company, the support comes from postponement payments, mainly for their capital, for the capital. That's what we've seen in the past few months, and depending on the case, we can postpone interest payments as well that you have to pay in the future, like to extend the payment terms. But each company has a different situation depending on the sector they are. For example, hotel company no, that had to close their hotels in the past 3 months, they have a very different situation than a company who is being able to sell online or have income coming from somewhere else. So depending on the type of industry, they are going to be more affected or less, and we are going to have work with them differently. That allowed us to have a direct conversation with our corporate clients and understand what are their expectations and their forecasts for the future regarding their relationship with the bank to allow to work with them starting now. And as system started to open, they we were going to be able to value all that and then establish more 6 months in the future. But mainly, that's what we are talking to our corporate clients. Thank you, Raul. Again, Thomas, we know that Colbún are talking about the installation, putting available the installations of the companies, the company's facilities where you operate for uh, for the communities. If you can share a little bit about your experience, and one of the questions that we've received from our audience that we are trying to summarize here is, what are the conditions that you're going to be offering to try to facilitate these such unstable times for people? You are generators, but I believe that you have an agreement in the power sector. Very quickly, I'd like to add some comments from what Alicia said about the gender equality that somehow this crisis has brought to life. Of course, uh, digital work or home office has overloaded some women because they had to work with their kids as well. And one of the topics that we've been talking about is how to flexibilize during their work day, especially for mothers that are in this home office condition, to give her an opportunity. And also we are calling their male partners to help. It's been an opportunity to reinforce the concept that we've been trying to work for a long time to bring gender equality. Going about the question, Kobun has two different sort of ventures in the south of the country that we have two centers in the past 10 years, and they couldn't work crisis. So we contact the local authorities local health authorities and to use it as health centers. Beyond this specific action, what was important is how, with creativity, some companies are getting together with the government and also civil agents to face this crisis. In our point of view, the important thing is from the all groups of interest, how can we interact and how can we get to know what the communities need? Regarding the audience uh, question, of course, the general answer in terms of services and basic services in Chile is to postpone during the crisis, during this time that many people had to reduce their income or postpone their duties through this basic service and try to postpone that, meaning making it easier for them to pay installments of 12 to 24 months, and also coming to an agreement how different agencies evolved in this industry or somehow are part of it, and how we can make these payments and how can we finance all that. These are the questions that we are discussing right now, and how to deal in different segments. And also we need to come to an agreement in this mechanics and to know that there is a consensus. There is also already in operations in the sense that to postpone uh, duties and payments from clients that are more vulnerable, to make sure that they can count on these basic services. They are so important for their lives during this emergency time. Thank you, Thomas. Now, last question that I'd like to ask you all, and I'm going to also bring some questions from the audience, from many that we've been receiving from our group here. And at the end, I'd like you all to give us a message of how we changed today, what's going on today, how decisions in the future are going to change, how we see the economy, and also if you, in your case, if you could tell me what are the cooperation models for the South cooperation in a way to strengthen this collaboration. Of course, there are many important things that are combined with the final reflection. First of all, let me tell you, I think that you need to think out of the box because this pandemic is changing uh, economic and social relations radically, and we don't know what's going to happen. There's a lot of uncertainties and solidarity that Raul's talking about. I totally agree with him. We can finally generate several changes that are important. And I believe that these changes, we're going to go to the configuration and the production and trade on the global level. But from the South universe, we had a very good meeting with ministers of science and technology, and we talked about the collaboration and cooperation and how technology and innovation can collaborate with the private and public sector, and including in to try to have some kind of forecast for the pharmaceutical region in the region, unifying efforts. Maybe we are generating joint patents like Brazil did with the HIV, AIDS, when Brazil managed to break patents. And another very important topic that I like to talk about is energy. I think in the region, we have a huge uh, topic when you talk about power and decarbonization. There's a politic of state here in Chile. Chile is doing it. Costa Rica has done like for 15 years, and also the regional integration in this topic is very important. For example, Chile could be a great solar platform, not only for Chile, but also the whole region if we change. If we manage to do that, I believe that Chile could help to create a new industry. We need to think about a different way to work. The central topic here is the cooperation south, and I think we have a lot of perspectives here, and we are in the crossway here, and that's how we need to. I like to finish my intervention. I'd like to thank you all, Teresa, because there is an opportunity there. We can have to see it as an opportunity to change, to create a new and different world, more sustainable, with a well-being state, more complete. Because all companies are suffering because you don't have this state of well-being and welfare state, to be more accurate. We don't have this welfare state. Europe does have that. We don't, and we can ought eh, we need to think it more differently, to have a new pact, new social pact, different, where companies, government, and society can talk in what kind of future we want for us in our regions. We have very powerful business people, very able in their production industry, in their industry. So we need to change our conversation. So Teresa, ECLAC, and us are, and myself are open to a government and to the society to see how can we work in sectors like energy sector that I really think is very important right now. So let's go on for it. Let's carry on. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Alicia. It's wonderful to see a positive reflection that yes, we can. There are opportunities. Think out of the box. Try to see the space of public-private cooperation. Luis Felipe, I think, let me tell you, there are several questions. Of course, we talk about a topic that is very important in our region, but also in others, but it's very important to us, which is corruption. And how can you lose sight of this agenda and all this sustainable network, uh, climate change? How can you protect vulnerable communities? How how are we going to have this response? I'm also talking about elderly people and also commercial opportunity. What's your view, and what's the view of the United Nations? Thank you very much. Thank you, as Lisa, as I said, it's a privilege to be part of this session. I'd like to say that, of course, we can see this as an opportunity. It is an opportunity. We want, as UNPD and the DP, to see how this opportunity can build new future lines, to have a different future and social objective that is very important, as Alisa said, to see the society as not only on its economic side, but social side as well, and to build a new normality that is very strong. For example, gender, to create a new, more inclusive normality in terms of gender, not only related to that, but also the care system, the healthcare system, if you can invest more on that. It has a huge implication in terms of equality, but also productivity. Thirdly, connectivity. Something that this crisis is showing us that connectivity should be one of our priorities. Actually, the three priorities: connectivity, connectivity, and connectivity. We need to insist on that. We're still not very aware of the effect that we are going to have, that this crisis is going to have in the human capital. We have, we need to change a quick and inclusive change for the human capital. This is just the beginning of the recovery, this social pact, which is for the economic, environmental, and social pact, which is completely in agreement with the sustainable agreement, the sustainable uh, agenda. We need to be very careful to so that the situation don't get stuck in our bureaucracy. We need to generate it in creating through transparency and to rebuild this confidence and try to get back to this to a virtuous cycle with transparency and to use our resources to farm our citizens. Thanks, Luis Felipe. I think that's what everybody said. The United Nations with its view and also private sector, the view of sustainability, economic, social, and environmental inclusion, to be more inclusive, and with the private sector in having responsible business. I need to end right now. One final question from Raul and Thomas, so we can end our panel. Maybe a final reflection that normally for the human being, the most difficult thing is change. I think this pandemic's been a shock, and actually people need to adapt to change more quickly from now on. And I think the other important message is that governments and um, private sector and the civil society in general need to think that their most important investment should be related to health and science and technology. That in our countries, uh, we didn't pay attention to that. And now we see that those who had invested in these topics in the past are doing a lot better right now. And we'll be out of this crisis more effectively. We need to think about science, technology, health, as and the work is there to. We need to work on that. To inclusion is very important. Financial inclusion is very important. Digitalization is very important as well. Online will grow like humongously, and also contingency, that anything that can happen in the future, because I'm sure that that's not going to be our last pandemic. I feel that we weren't prepared for it, but I hope that for the next time we have a stronger health system, technology and science also with more investment to be ready. Thank you, Raul. And Thomas, very quickly, please, because we need to close it. Very quickly, thank you very much to inviting me. It's a historic moment, the one that we're living right now, that, that requires the best of us. Once more, the collaboration, teamwork, solidarity is going to allow us to get out of this crisis. More dialogue, more empathy, and more humbleness. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you all for participating to follow us. We had more than 400 people participating. So I'd like to thank you all from Global Compact, all of you who's been with us, and we hope to be back soon. Bye-bye. Thank you all. Thank you again. It was wonderful, and it was very motivational for me. I'm full of reasons now to work. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Chao.